Hello, everyone. Welcome to the World Series of Board Gaming's Designer Series, hosted on the Dice Tower. My name is Chris George.
And I'm Brian Muller.
But today is a little bit different from our Designer Series. Isn't that right, Brian? It's no longer a Designer Series, but it is a Publisher Series.
Yeah, exciting. We get to hear it from the other end of the perspective. So when somebody's got a great idea, the next phase, getting in with the publisher, is pretty exciting. The designers have already talked a lot about the relationships with the publisher, so it's cool to talk to some people on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. We want this series to be all about industry insights, right? And so covering it from both a design perspective and a publisher perspective in that development process and the key integral element to it. And what better way to start us off with Stronghold Games? We have two lovely people here, Sydney Engelstein and Stephen Buonocore, both who are involved in Stronghold Games, but we'll let them tell you what their roles are and how they've been involved in Stronghold in the past and in the future.
And one more thing about Stephen Buonocore is he was really instrumental in our very first year at the World Series of Board Gaming. He helped me personally connect with so many people in the industry, and that's really what this is all about.
Yeah, it's true. So if you are interested in attending the World Series of Board Gaming, of course, you can attend it September 24th to the 28th in Las Vegas. You can get your tickets now. There's going to be a ton of people there. And of course, it will be streamed live on the Dice Tower Network, which is, of course, why we partnered up with the Dice Tower to bring you this series. And stick around until the very end, because we're going to tell you how you can win yourself a copy of Terraforming Mars. And if you already have Terraforming Mars, well, then, hey, we'll give you a Terraforming Mars expansion that you don't have. But stick around to the end. Brian and I will tell you about that. Let's turn it over to Sydney and Stephen. And we are joined now by Sydney Engelstein and Stephen Buonocore. How are you both doing on this lovely evening or morning, depending on when this is released?
Awesome.
Doing great.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us on this call. This is our first time we're interviewing two people at once, which is a World Series designer interview series first, and it's also our first publisher series where we're going to talk about the history of Stronghold. So what I'd love for you to do is just sort of introduce yourself as to how you're involved with Stronghold and what you're doing with them now, and we'll take it from there. Stephen, why don't you go first, and then Sydney follow up with what your current role is.
I was going to let Sydney go first, but if you insist, okay. I am Stephen Buonocore. I'm the founder, former owner, and former president of Stronghold Games. And now I'm just industry adjacent. I do a little bit of media. I'm known as the Podfather of Gaming on my YouTube channel. So you can call me a content creator in retirement from those roles over at Stronghold Games.
And my name's Sydney Engelstein. Since Stephen decided to go derelict on his duties and retire and abandon us all, I sort of stepped up and took over a lot of his duties, and I'm doing them actively now. I'm the director of game development at Stronghold, and Indie Boards and Cards, which I'm sure we will talk about, are currently sister companies that have the same crew running those ships.
So if you don't mind, Chris, I'd like to jump in with the first question. I know it's
absolutely.
a little bit different than the way we normally do it. But Sydney, I know you're a part, or at least at one time you were a part of a 3-person game design team, and you designed one of the games that I really enjoyed playing with my family, which is Space Cadets. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we get into the publisher side of things?
Yeah, so Space Cadets was the first game I ever designed. I was in high school at the time, and
Cool.
My dad, who your listeners may have heard of, his name's Jeff Engelstein. He's a little bit well known, not as much as me, but a little bit. He was doing his segment Game Tech on the Dice Tower podcast, and he loved being in the board game industry. He wanted to get involved doing design. He worked on a board game with my older brother that they came out with together called Ares Project. And after they did that one, they were still really jazzed about game design. And I was like, I want to get in on this for sure. And so the three of us worked together as a family game designing unit, and we made Space Cadets, which is sort of a zany multiplayer co-op spaceship simulator where every player has to take on a different role, like in Star Trek, where one person is the bridge, and one person is the navigations expert, and one person is the tractor beam controller, and one person mans the weapon station, etc. And every single station has a different little mini game associated with it that you have to do all at the same time in a time section, and it's really silly, kind of like Mario Party mini game vibes.
Nice.
And it was so much fun designing that with my dad and brother. I really never looked back, and here I am 10 years later, 10 plus years later, still designing board games, and still designing them with Stronghold Games, who actually published Space Cadets way back when. So can't knock that brand loyalty.
You stayed with Stronghold the whole time.
and that's how sort of how you got your start, right? In terms of getting in with Stronghold. What was that process like in terms of approaching them, or did you use your family's connections, or maybe walk us through that in those initial stages of how you grew into working with Stronghold, and how that relationship evolved?
Yeah, so I am originally from New Jersey. My family still lives there. My dad and brother still live there. And Stephen Buonocore also is from New Jersey. And we both went to the same local convention. DexCon is sort of the local Jersey convention.
Cool.
And so we had met long before Stephen made Stronghold, or we thought about making board games. I'd been going to this game convention since I was like 9 or 10. And I met Stephen when he was busy losing at board games to me.
This is very true, and I have to chime in at this point. So you think Sydney's voice is kind of high right now? It's about 2 octaves lower than when she was a 9 or 10-year-old young lady.
Whippersnapper.
Full Mickey Mouse.
I mean, she used to run around the convention like she owned the place, and she did, because she was an absolutely amazing gamer, and her dad would be there playing these like heavy big games, and I didn't really know Jeff. We just kind of saw each other at the convention, and Sydney would be playing in like these tournaments that they had at DexCon, and I remember this like it was yesterday. We played, I think I told you this, Sydney, but I don't know that you remember doing this. We played in the finals of this tournament called Woolly Bully. It's a game of tile placement where you're trying to make the largest pen with your sheep in it to score the most points. And I'm like, 10-year-old shows up, and there's just the 2 of us in the final. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to play this. I'm going to win this game, obviously. And I'm going, and I finally make my last pen, and I'm like, well, I'm going to stop now, because you stop at a certain point. She killed me in this game. And this was my first introduction to playing with the shark that is Sydney Engelstein. Smart, 10, 12, I don't know. You were a really lovely, nice young lady. And that was my introduction. I kind of knew her even before I knew Jeff, her father.
I mean, I was lucky enough to be from kind of the first generation of kids who were really raised in the board game world. I feel like people my dad's age and older than me, they kind of discovered board games on their own, and they were sort of the outcasts, the nerds. And nowadays, those people have grown up, become parents, and are raising their kids to play board games from an incredibly young age. And those kids, they just get board games intrinsically because they started playing it really young. Mm-hmm. And that's how it was for me. When I was born, my dad had a collection of over 1,000 different board games. So I don't remember a time that I wasn't going to conventions and playing board games. So it's always been a really important part of my life. But yeah, so we all met Stephen just kind of very casually, the way you get to do at board game conventions. You get to network with your whole community, and there's so many great people there. I made a ton of friends going to DexCon. And so when he started up Stronghold Games, we were all very excited for him. I remember he had a little 1-person booth that he set up at DexCon.
Nice.
It's not the kind of convention with booths. There were like 3 of them, and one of them was his, and he was just hawking his board games, and it was very cool. So when we designed Space Cadets, it was kind of like, oh, this is almost a friend that we know has a board game company. It would be really nice to work with him to try and get this published.
And that whole story that I told in the meeting of Sydney probably happened, would you say, Sydney, around like 2000, the year 2000, and maybe a couple of years later after that? What would you think?
Later than that, because I was 4 in 2000.
4? Okay, so not that. So maybe like
2005.
Let's call it 2005 to 2006. And Stronghold does not exist at that time, and then starts in 2009 is when it got formed. And by that point, I got to know, of course, Sydney and Jeff, and another very good friend of ours that lived and went to those conventions and hung out with us. His name is Andrew Parks. Oh. You might know, noted designer Andrew Parks. He's done a lot of IP-based games, but he started pitching games to me and to another very famous person that you might have heard who also went to these conventions, Zev Schlesinger, who had already started Z-Man Games. So he had pitched me Core Worlds, which became like my first big release that was specifically and only a game that we took from the ground up, unlike other games where we kind of got a license and then brought them in some reprints and things like that. And then right after Core Worlds, like the next year after that, it was Space Cadets, and that set the relationship between the Engelstein family and myself.
Cool. That's really cool. So why don't we just rewind a little bit, and Stephen, perhaps you could tell the viewers and listeners sort of what your reasoning was behind starting a board gaming company, right? Like your initial goals and that initial first couple years. What made you want to take that step? Did you come at it more from a design perspective or like a business perspective? And what were the different areas, and why did you choose that route for those people out there who might be considering a career in the board gaming industry?
First thing I'll say, don't do it. But no, the landscape back in the mid-aughts and in that time was very different than it is right now. There were many fewer publishers, and I was just a gamer, like we just described, going to the local conventions. That was it. That was my industry background. I'm a gamer. I'm meeting people at conventions just to game. But I was studying the industry too. I saw a lot of smaller companies starting up. And I said, some of them, not Z-Man, who was doing, Zev was doing a fantastic job, at Z-Man. But a lot of companies, you can kind of see that they weren't bringing good business discipline into what they were doing. It was just obvious. So I thought that with my knowledge of business and with my love of gaming, I can combine those two to make something like this happen. In 2008, well, the world almost ended economically. Right. It was a huge turmoil. I was working for a big banking firm. When that happened, I stayed with the firm a little bit, got laid off, and I said to myself, you know what? I got to chart my own course here. And once I got hooked up back with another large firm, I said, now I'm going to start planning what I can do. So in 2009, with another person who had some more industry knowledge, I brought the business knowledge. Somebody else brought a little more of the hobby game knowledge of that industry in. We combined the knowledge, and I started Stronghold Games with that person. That didn't last very long. And then I owned the company soon thereafter on my own. And we started by getting ourselves known by bringing reprinted games back in. And those first reprints were Code 777, Survive, Escape from Atlantis, still doing very well, and Confusion was known in Europe. It wasn't really known in the US. So the original thesis of mine was, well, I'll bring back known games from known designers, but then people will look at it like, well, who's this company, Stronghold? I'll take a chance on them. And then they would buy in and say, oh, this company can do a good job, so we'll start doing that. That was the beginning of it. And then we rolled the snowball forward after that.
Cool. And so you said you come from a banking background, like a finance background. Is that correct?
I worked for 35 years in IT on Wall Street. So I'm an IT guy, but I have an MBA. I know the business side to the extent that I needed to know the business side of an investment bank.
Right.
So bringing business discipline and processes, because in IT it's all about process. Bringing that background and that knowledge base, and marrying that with a love of gaming is thought to myself that I can create something very interesting here for myself, and the history says that it kind of worked out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Stronghold seems to be doing still pretty well. And then Sydney, we talked a little bit about your getting in with Stronghold was through Space Cadets, but do you want to talk a little bit more about your background and then how that sort of design aspect has taken you to your current role?
Yeah, so after Space Cadets, as I alluded to, I kept designing with my family, and we published several more games all through Stronghold. Dragon and Flagon, Survive Space Attack, Space Cadets Dice Duel, and these designs were sort of going up to and through me going to college, where I was now no longer living with my dad and brother, which made it a lot harder to design together from long distance. So we kind of fell off designing games together partway through me being in college. My dad kept designing solo, but I sort of fell out of it, and I got a degree in anthropology and Japanese, and thought when I graduated college I was going to try and use those degrees to do something with my life. I was not really intending to go into the board game world at first. I wasn't trying to pursue a degree in game design or anything like that, though I did do a few anthropology of board gaming communities because it still was very interesting to me, the sort of circles of conventions and gaming communities that I'd grown up in, and the D&D community resurgence through the creation of 5e and Critical Role and stuff like that. I did a couple of independent studies into those sorts of things, but though they were really tangential to just a general anthropology degree. So when I graduated, I applied to a lot of marketing firms because I thought I wanted to do anthropological marketing. But no one was hiring me. And eventually, after a couple of months of applying around and not getting hired, you think, I should really expand my circles of what I'm applying to. And I looked at my resume, and like half of it was board game design because I'd published all these board games before college, and then anthropology was literally just one line about having a degree in it, which didn't seem as exciting. So I was like, maybe I could get a board game job. So I started sort of applying halfway to board games and halfway to anthropology jobs. And I was out at Gen Con the summer after I graduated. And I was having lunch with my dad and Stephen. And Stephen said, guys, I have big news. You shouldn't tell anyone because it's not out there yet. But Stronghold Games is merging with Indie Boards and Cards. And I was like, does that mean you have job openings? if the companies are merging, will you need more people? And Stephen was like, I don't know. Email me after the convention. So I emailed him. He got me in contact with the head of Indie Boards and Cards, Travis Worthington. And it turned out they were looking for a new project manager. And I just so happened to contact them shortly before they publicly listed the job opening. And so he was like, you can apply early. And so it was really that like personal connection with Stephen, just being in the right place at the right time and having the people to talk to that got me sort of one foot in the door. And so the Indie Boards and Cards crew brought me out to do some game development with their team in person. So I looked at all the prototypes they were currently working on and offered my feedback and what I would do to develop them. And they sent me a prototype and I developed it personally for them, and they really liked what I did. So I've been working for them ever since.
And it was obviously absolute perfect fit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a young, aggressive, intelligent person who's been doing game design, to bring them on to initially be part of the game development team. But in my head, the long-term goal was, of course, I knew that I was on a path to retiring at some point, and it would have been a perfect person to potentially take over my role as I went into the sunset.
And it was also nice because during the merger, Indie Boards and Cards, you know, they have a whole set of staff. They've got like a whole design and development team already there, but Stephen was kind of just the only person from Stronghold. So even though I was a brand new hire, since I'd been working with Stronghold for so long, and I knew Stephen and his team out in New Jersey so well because we'd gone to board game, you know, nights together all the time, I kind of had that insight into the brand and into the portfolio of Stronghold, rather than somebody just having to start from scratch.
Yeah, it seems like a perfect fit. One question that I'm very interested in is how that merger kind of came about. What are sort of the classifications or qualities that make another board gaming company like a good fit for merging with another company, and how did those decisions come about? Why was it beneficial for both parties, and what was that sort of process like?
Yeah, I'll take that. There were a number of potential suitors, let's put it that way, who had approached me to acquire Stronghold Games, and obviously I can't talk about who they were, but they were inside the industry, some were tangential, even outside the board gaming industry. And there were discussions, none of them came to fruition for whatever reason. Over the years 2016, 17, 18, Travis Worthington, right, the current owner, CEO of Indie Game Studios, right, the merged company, we call it Indie Game Studios, he came to me. We were good friends. We had both kind of grown up in the same way in the industry. I believe he had his first game out under Indie Boards and Cards in 2009, right there at that point, and mine was in 2010. So we both started at the same time. We both had a similar trajectory, both doing very well. And we teased each other because we were good friends. Oh, I'm going to buy you. No, I'm going to buy you. And it was this whole thing going back and forth because Asmodee was out there buying everybody, right? I mean, and as they still are, the mergers were starting to snowball during this 2016, 17, 18 timeframe. So Travis and I were teasing each other about the whole thing. And finally, one day he said, maybe we should get serious about this. It sounds like it's a good idea. So we sat down at the gathering of friends in 2018 and hashed out preliminary ways this would work, what the path to getting the companies together, path to me leaving at some point. I mean, because that, was obviously part of the entire conversation. At some point, I'm going to retire, and I'll do some other things in the game industry, like media and game design, as that might come up later on.
Yeah.
So we had the conversation, and then a few months later, we had it in stone. And then at Gen Con 2018, we announced the merger of the companies, August 1st of 2018. And it worked out well because, let's face it, business is business, and it has to work out financially for all parties. That's obviously the most important thing. It has to do that. And it has to be comfortable for everybody to be able to make enough money to make the transaction, and for people to get paid out and stuff. So it all every number made sense. And the path to me staying around for a certain amount of time and then finally doing the retirement all just worked out fantastically. And I'm very proud of what happened And I'm proud that we got Sydney there on the right path to take over because she's much smarter than me, and she's more driven than me, and she's the right person to do all that work. So it worked out great.
That kind of speaks to what I've been seeing with these interviews, that the board game hobby is really such a community, right? It's often even just relationships that you make at conventions and relationships that you make amongst the industry. We all just like playing games generally, and most people generally do that to be social. In terms of bringing people in to that community and to that sort of family, what are the sort of characteristics that you look for, both Sydney and Stephen, at your time there, when someone is pitching you a game, right? On the other side, because we've talked to a lot of designers about their process of pitching and getting involved, but it'd be interesting to hear from the other side. What do you look for when people are pitching a game, and what do you seek out in terms of game design, or even Stronghold's overall arcing principles or flair that they like to see?
I can take this. I actually head up acquisitions at indie game studios. So anytime somebody wants to submit a game, their emails come directly to me, and I'm in charge of setting up those meetings at conventions and such. And it's always a very difficult question to answer, especially because usually it's people who are, so board game design hopefuls who are like, just tell me what you want to see.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to specify exactly what makes a game good. These days, it's even harder. In Stephen's day, as he was sort of alluding to, the market was a lot more sparse. People were looking for all kinds of games, and anything that was fun, probably going to be a hit.
Yeah.
But these days, we're at an all-time high of saturation in the market of board games and new board games coming out. And even games that are really fun are just going missed by the wayside and not making any money. So it can be very difficult for a publisher to know what game is going to hit and what game isn't. The worst thing I have to say to a designer when they pitch me a game is, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. I can't give you advice on what to fix about this game. It's just not going to stand out. Because the sort of number one thing we look for is a game with something unique and brand new that we've never seen before. It needs a selling point. It needs that byline on its marketing sheet that's going to cut through the noise of the hundreds of other very good games it's competing against. Which is a very difficult thing to tell someone, give your game it factor. It's like, it's not very clear. But it really does have to be, okay, this is a great set collection game, but I've played 20,000 set collection games and it reminds me of all of them, but it isn't doing one new thing. Just give me one really cool, new, unique thing, and then lead with that when you're submitting your board game and you've made yourself a sell sheet or you're emailing a publisher. Don't start with, I made a 20-minute long set collection game. You gotta say, here's why this game's nothing like any other game you've ever played, because that's what's going to get you that meeting. That's what's going to get it tried.
And to really underscore that, when 2,000 games come out on one day every year, and that's at Thursday of the Spiel in Essen, one day, 2,000 games have never been seen before, and now they're on the market. To cut through that noise takes something special, and you just can't have a game that takes red cubes and moves them to here and converts them to blue cubes and you sell them. You gotta have some. Why is this game different than every other game? What makes this unique?
Yeah, totally.
I have a question too. So I imagine that you've been pitched a couple games and they come in with a theme already on them, but then you decide that there's a theme that has to change. How does that happen? How do you go about that process?
Generally we will talk to the designer first and make sure they are okay with the idea that their theme could be changed. Some designers are very partial to the story that they've created in their game, or it's something special to them, and they don't want to work with a company that is going to make changes to their theme. But most people are fine with it and have kind of just put on a theme that works with their mechanics. And we'll usually do it either because we think there's a more marketable theme, like, sci-fi type games tend to sell well, or something is too specifically niche to like get a lot of people interested in it. Like, I don't know, a game about, well, now I'm just making myself excited with all the examples I'm thinking of, because people do like niche themes. But there's like a stock market game. There's a million stock market games. Can we make this something that's going to be a little more jazzy and not just moving numbers back and forth? Or if we want to fit it into the world we've already come out with, if we're looking to make sort of a companion game to one of our heavy hitters, so that the new game will get gifted a little bit more audience by the people who are fans of the original game, which will be either it feels similar to the original game in terms of audience that it's seeking, weight and complexity, or just like it encompasses sort of a scenario that we could see existing in that world. Like if we were making a Terraforming Mars spin-off game about trying to handle imports and exports and get everything organized. Like, I can see that as a microcosm of what is actually happening in the Terraforming Mars game. So even if it feels very different mechanically, it makes sense why you might throw that theme on there.
Cool.
Right.
That's cool. So I can do a blowing up asteroids game. Is that the next segment?
Terraforming Mars, slamming asteroids into the planet. Perfect.
Terraforming Mars, the big slam.
There you go. I love it.
That's always everyone's favorite Terraforming Mars cards anyway, is the ones where you get to slam asteroids into the surface of the planet.
Well, speaking about Terraforming Mars, why don't we talk about Terraforming Mars and how Stronghold came to publish it, and what that sort of conversation was like, the elements that happened behind the scenes, right. That whole journey from a publisher's standpoint. Right.
So you mentioned relationships and how important relationships are, right? And we make these, and they will, and you foster these things, and over time, good things can happen to you when you do that. And this is a great case in point. I have now even a fantastic relationship with Ludofact in Germany. There's also a Ludofact USA. Ludofact Germany, their head of export, meaning he deals with everybody who's not part of the German crowd, right? He and I had a great relationship, and he said, Stephen, you do a lot of space games. I know these guys in Sweden that they're coming out with a game about space. Why don't you talk to them? Okay, sure. Sounds good. So I met with Fricks Games at Essen and I can't remember the year. It would have been 2014 even. So we wanted to have it at 15. Yes, I believe so. And they showed it to me, and I'm like, well, okay, this is very interesting. I like the multi-resources, the card play. This is great. Let me take it back and let me see what we can do. We played it a bunch of times because you never get to play too much, right, at a convention like that. We played it, and we said, okay, this is good, but with a little development, this could be just great. So I had a good friend of mine who was not actually part of Stronghold, and I'll give him credit every time I like to talk about the beginnings here. His name is Jeff Gamble, and he's a guy out in Pennsylvania. He's a good friend and loved kind of meaty games. And he said, I'd love to do development with you on this. I'm like, great. He took prototype and he worked with Fricks to iterate. And we took a good design, solid, and just made it a great design. I mean, he's responsible for the 2 actions on your player turn. You can take 2 actions. It used to be 1 action. You just do one thing, play a card next turn. And that, removes all the combos that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
So the game did not come out when Fricks wanted it to come out, which would have been at Essen 2015. We delayed it until we had it an early release at Gen Con 2016, and then the really big splash at Essen 2016. And there was just that one relationship with LudoFact and with Frank Yeager at LudoFact that got me in that door there to now work on that game. And it's, has been just an amazing journey with that game. And we made sure, working with Fricks, that we then had constant flow of expansions on the game over the next several years to keep it fresh and people keeping wanting the next thing. And then, of course, Sydney can tell you the rest of the Terraforming Mars story, where all of a sudden now another game in the line. Sydney, what happened after that?
Are you alluding to Ares Expedition?
I am alluding.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Isn't that the game? The next game in the line. That you had a lot to do with, of course.
So, obviously, Terraforming Mars became a huge, huge hit, and there were tons of expansions for it. And we love Terraforming Mars, but it is a lot, and as more and more expansions came out for it, it became more of a lot because it went from a 3-hour game to a 3.5-hour game or 4-hour game, depending on what you're adding onto it, with a lot of overhead for teaching the rules to new players. And so even though it was such an incredible game, there was definitely a contingent of people who weren't going to be able to kind of experience it because it's just too dense for them. Or too hard to get over the hump of reading the rules and understanding how it works. So now I have to remember years, 2019, I think.
Yep, that's right.
Me and my co-designer, Nick Little, started working on Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, which at the time was called Project Meatball, because Mars is red and round.
Not because it was meatball themed?
No, it's not meatball themed at the time. We just think all the best code names should be food based.
Yeah. That's a pretty good one.
Which was we set out with just the intention of what would Terraforming Mars look like if it played way shorter and had less rules overhead, so that the people who are too casual for the Terraforming Mars audience can get into it, and also hopefully still be strategically engaging enough to draw in the Terraforming Mars gamer and just give them a new experience with the game that they love. And so we mixed it with the Race for the Galaxy phase selection engine, because our first thought was, oh, well, what cuts down time in a game better than simultaneous action? It's if you have 4 players, but you all take your turns at the same time, the game takes a fourth as long as it would have otherwise. And it just clicked right away, like even before we'd done any kind of real development into it, when we had just gone through a list of Terraforming Mars cards and pulled out all the ones that could function without us changing anything on them. We're like, oh, we don't know what cities are. Take that card out. But this one just produces 4 plants. That one's good. Put it down and play it. And even at that stage, it was already like we could tell that the systems really gelled with each other. So we kept working on that, and we brought it over to Sweden. I didn't get to go, but Nick and Travis Worthington flew over to bring it to the Frickses once it was kind of in a playable state, get their input and their feedback, and we worked with them on it to make sure that it was really like something that the Terraforming Mars crowd would recognize as their own game that evoked the same feeling as Terraforming Mars did. And so that came out. When did that come out? 2020?
It first, 2020, I believe it hit as I was going into the sunset.
Going out into the sunset. Yeah, it's listed as 2021 on BGG. I just looked it up now, but
okay. Well, that announced, may have been when the retail release was, but its Kickstarter was in 2020.
Right.
Because we basically have a year sort of cycle after a Kickstarter before the game actually comes out. But yeah, so it was really fantastic for me to get to work with Terraforming Mars in this way, because it's such a great game and a fantastic IP. I'd actually never done a game like based on another game. Well, that's not true, because I guess I made Survive Space Attack, so never mind.
That's true.
I had done a game based on a game. This felt different. It was just really, really fantastic. So that was kind of like the next step of Terraforming Mars was to sort of expand the type of player base that it can suit and the type of game that it is, which only continued because just a couple of years after that, the Frixes designed the dice game for Terraforming Mars, which is not out yet, but was on Kickstarter and should be fulfilling this or next year. I should have checked on that before I came on this call, but it will be fulfilling soon.
It's fulfilling soon. We're just building the hype for
it. Even more sort of family oriented, like simple mechanical gameplay, while not giving up the deep strategy and combos that all the Terraforming Mars gamers love, and will reach an even greater audience of, younger kids. And Stephen has something he wants to say.
No, I didn't want to cut you off. I was going to say, and I showed off Terraforming Mars, the dice game, at the World Series of Board Gaming last year. I had the first copy with the 3D printed dice and all that. I'm sorry, Sydney, I didn't want to cut you off, but that was it was the first copy, the only copy in the world, and I was able to show it to. It's another good reason you should all go to the World Series of Board Gaming. It's an unbelievable event.
What a great idea!
It's a great idea.
What a good plug.
Yeah. And it was really nice, since this was the sort of the first thing that the Frixes had designed in the Terraforming Mars line post the merger with Indie Boards and Cards. So it was kind of a new experience. Me and Nick did development on the dice game with them for a while. It's pretty different than the version that they initially sent us. So kind of opens up a whole new workflow for them of having a development team that they can send this stuff to and work with in creating these new products.
Yeah, because that's something that I grew to have a larger appreciation of by doing this sort of interview series, is the amount of work that happens from the publisher side of thing, from that development side of thing, right? It doesn't ever stop. Have you ever gotten a game that's been perfect and needed no development?
I mean, I suppose we have had games that needed no development if they were very simple,
right.
Like a real simple card game type thing. We just sort of need to slap graphic design on it, write the rule book,
right?
Because people are worse at writing rule books than they think they are, and that's not a dig. Rule book writing is incredibly hard.
Yeah,
it is very hard.
Yeah, so we actually recently signed a game from a British designer, Ellie Dix, who came out to BGG down in Texas and pitched us her game. And it basically needed no development, just a little tiny bit of, we suggested that she add in this and that. She went off, she did it, she gave it back to us. It was great. And then we're just, graphic designing it. But it's a very simple roll and cut game where you're like an archaeologist cutting up pieces of paper. So a game like that, sometimes, very occasionally, but every other game needs a lot of development, generally. And usually developers are kind of the unsung heroes in the board game industry. Sure. I remember kind of recently, people were petitioning for there to be a developer category on BGG because they weren't listed on the board games that they had worked on, even though, a developer can do a ton of really important and game-changing, mechanics-changing work into a game before it comes out.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely, we've heard that a lot from a lot of the game designers that we've interviewed, is just how much it is important to have a really good developer working with you on the back end of the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's surprising to me that BGG hasn't implemented it, or that there isn't some sort of way to categorize that.
They did now. They do have it now.
It's implemented now.
They've done now.
But it took it like years.
A couple of years ago, there was sort of a big push of respect your developers.
Yeah.
To get that on there. But, I personally almost like developing games more than designing them. I think it's very interesting to do. It's certainly a different skill set than original design, because it's less about pulling something out of nothing, and more so the knowledge of, what in this game is fun and how do we hone that and how do we focus in on that? What tricks can we pull out to heighten what it's already doing and like make it more efficient, which it feels almost more like a puzzle than like a artistic masterwork or anything like that.
I imagine it takes a lot of finesse of character as well too, to deal with the stressful relationship of taking somebody's baby and dressing them up in the clothes that you want to put them in.
It depends on the designer. Most designers are lovely to work with and really want to see their games, if you tell them a suggestion, then they'll play it and they'll realize, oh wow, I see what you're going for here. We have had a couple of experiences with designers who feel like we're taking things in a different direction than they originally intended, but usually that's not the case. And we stay in pretty constant contact with any designers that we're working with, and it's always a very collaborative kind of experience. So very few people leave feeling like we corrupted their vision or anything like that.
Going back to Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, your initial work on that, was that sort of was that driven by Stronghold? Was that sort of like a target of Strongholds, or was that you and Nick being like, we can create something and then bringing it forward? I guess it's kind of hard to see where those sort of lines blur, because you're always likely thinking about how to propel the company forward, but that distinction.
That was something that Travis Worthington actually specifically requested from us. He was like, I would love to see Terraforming Mars brought to a larger demographic by making it simpler. And he was like, I have no idea what it'll look like. All I know is I wanted to play in half the time.
Yeah.
We're like, okay.
I want this. Go do it.
Yes.
In a sense, that feels like it might be. It is its own thing, but you mentioned that you enjoyed developing more. Do you feel like that felt more like developing or designing something from scratch?
It definitely felt closer to designing something from scratch than.
There's so many differences, right?
It was my first time designing a game like that, where there's just oodles of cards and effects and tags. We have incredibly complex spreadsheets that keeps track of everything and makes sure it's all balanced. I've worked on a lot of other games, but generally they're slightly lighter in weight, and they're not as card based. So it was definitely feeling like, even though we're using the basis of as many Terraforming Mars cards as we can directly pull, it's the weight of, oh wow, we're really coming up with these mechanics sort of from scratch and making sure everything works together and playing it over and over and over and over again, to get the balance on all of these different strategies right. So it was really fun, but as I said, we have, sort of a year cycle on most of our games where we'll start designing or developing it, finish, Kickstarter, it comes out, we start designing and developing it again. And we worked on Ares Expedition for 2+ years, which is way more than I have put into any other game that I've worked on, just in terms of sheer percentage of my time at my job that it took up. Usually I'm working on 3 or 4 different projects kind of simultaneously, rather than intensely focused on one.
Yeah.
And obviously an IP that needed to be handled very, very well, because the fan base was there, and they're your target audience, right? The original Terraforming Mars players are your target audience for this game as well. And then later, and players who, I don't want a 2+ hour experience, I want a 1 hour experience. So going through it very specifically with all these new mechanics that were created, it just took inspiration from Terraforming Mars, the original, to create Ares Expedition. And I think Nick and Sydney, and with the help of Fricks, they did a phenomenal job bringing that all together.
Well, that's why all three of you are listed on the box as designers, right? Because that's what you did.
Mhm.
We sure did design it.
In terms of expansion content, I feel like I could talk to you guys forever. I would try to just touch upon a few more things before I let you go, because this has just been so fun and flown by. In terms of expansion content, because Terraforming Mars has produced so much expansion content, and now even Ares Expedition has gotten their 3 expansions, and even sort of Aeon's End from an Indie Boards and Cards has had consistent expansions. Is that would you say that's more publisher driven or more designer driven in terms of would Stronghold say, hey, we're feeling like a new expansion, what have you got in the can? Or would it be more, oh, I've got this expansion bubbling up inside me, Stronghold, will you publish it, or will you help develop it? What's that sort of journey like, and the planning and the pre-planning?
I think it's kind of, a little column A, little column B.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the Fricks guys, the original designers. They're true artists. They're not like me with the puzzle solving. They're very, I have to let the creative bug hit me, and when
Right.
they sort of come up with something, we're like, great, let's do this. Let's help you develop it. You guys may have heard they just announced we're doing a Prelude 2,
Oh yeah.
which is going to be like a prelude that incorporates elements from every other Terraforming Mars expansion that they've come out with, which is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, this prelude was several years after Turmoil, which was the last Terraforming Mars expansion that we had. Because they just didn't have another one that they had come up with. They had the dice game and other stuff, but
Yeah.
they didn't come up with the Terraforming Mars expansion. So it's not like we made up a Terraforming Mars expansion to fill the gap.
Yeah.
But on the other side, we've had something Terraforming Mars every year. We had the big box storage solution for Terraforming Mars fans. We had Ares Expedition and the expansion. We come in with the dice game because for a board game company, these big games that people, have huge fan bases are kind of what keep the lights on from year to year and allow us to come out with smaller games
Mm-hmm.
that are risks that we don't know if people are going to buy. And if we didn't come out with, something Terraforming Mars that we have a bit of a guaranteed audience for, that we know we're going to sell some units of, we can't sign these games from independent designers and come out with them in addition to the year. So we're not forcing Terraforming Mars content out of designers, but we're trying to make sure to keep the ball in the air, keep
Mm-hmm.
people interested, always something new for them to come back to and enjoy.
Yeah. Cool. And in terms of future plans, and I guess, Stephen, we touched upon this as well too. You can talk a little bit about your journey, briefly, your journey from retirement into what you're doing now. What do you think the future of Stronghold looks like, and what's also the future of Stephen Buonocore? And how is that tying in with Stronghold? Because I know, Stephen, you're designing a game, and might we see it at some point on Stronghold's list, or would you feel like you would need to do it in a separate capacity as well?
Sydney, why don't you talk about the future of Stronghold first? If you're, she can't give it up. This is company secrets now.
I mean, also, yeah, I definitely realize that there's probably a lot of projects out there that you can't talk about yet until the release schedule happens, etc. But how has Kickstarter impacted Stronghold, and like sort of the renewed, or not the renewed, but the boom of Kickstarter projects, right?
Yeah, I mean, Kickstarter is something that Indie Boards and Cards is very comfortable with, and Stronghold hadn't done much of before the merger. So I think that that was something that was really a boon to Stronghold, was getting the sort of know-how from the Indie Boards and Cards team on how to kickstart projects, because it can be really great to cultivate that audience of people who are excited enough for the game that they purchase it ahead of time, and also sort of pre-generate marketing and excitement so that when it comes out in retail, there's already a lot of buzz and positive reviews and stuff like that. So we definitely use Kickstarter for as much of the big title games like Terraforming Mars and Aeon's End as we can, to keep the audiences excited about them and getting the exclusive stuff as soon as it comes out. And we certainly plan to continue. As I mentioned, we got Prelude 2. We've got some other Terraforming Mars projects bubbling up that I asked specifically my boss today if I was allowed to talk about, and he said no.
I don't know what it is either.
Well, at least
they don't tell me anything.
Well,
at least you tried.
Project Lasagna, right?
You can allude to it, but do not tell Stephen Buonocore because he can't keep his mouth shut.
This is not true.
That's
Sydney.
also very fair. Yeah,
it was only once I did that.
But yeah, I mean, I mentioned that rolling cut that's going to come out from the Stronghold line.
Mm-hmm.
Like Stephen said way back at the beginning of this interview about how Stronghold started by sort of republishing games or licensing games from other countries. Stronghold has great relationship with sort of foreign publishers producing games localized for the US, and we still do that through the Stronghold label. So we're out there finding great games at Essen from all over the world to bring to the US and publish under the Stronghold label in English. So that's the kind of stuff that Stronghold has always been doing, and we hope to keep doing it. Hopefully people still like it. So far, so good.
Yeah.
So for me, the first thing I'm going to do after this Zoom call, is I'm going to call Travis Worthy and say, "What's happening that you haven't told me about?" Because I'm not supposed to know those things. But anyway, in retirement, yeah, I do my little content. I'm on the board of directors of the World Series of Board Gaming, which is
that's true.
Part of the relationship that I have with Brian and Chris right here, right? So they invited me to do that last year, and that's been a good way of directing a company a little bit as they move forward. And the biggest kind of thing, besides the game content, the media content that I'm doing and coverage that I'm doing of various things, I am now designing a game with Sydney's dad, Jeff Engelstein, and that is amazing. It came out of kind of nowhere. And Jeff said, "Would you like to co-design a game with me?" And I went, "With a hack like you? No way." To think about designing a game with not only a very good friend of many years, but the guy who literally wrote the book on game design, right? Behind me on my shelf back there's a whole section of Jeff Engelstein books on game design. So we're doing this. We were allowed to say that it has been signed for development by Asmodee, and that's all we can say about it. Whether it sees the light of day or not, we don't know. But that's where I am and loving life, and I follow, of course, Stronghold. So I'm going to go find out what's going on in the background.
It's a lovely full circle moment that happened there.
That's right.
And just quickly, I always like to ask this with our guests before we leave, and I always phrase it like this. So other than your own titles, and probably we should stick to this so that you don't choose any favorite Stronghold games and leave anybody else out. What are some of your favorite games out there? What are games you enjoy or designers that you enjoy playing?
I always feel like I have a very strange answer to this question because I get asked it a lot.
I love it.
My favorite game is Jungle Speed.
Wow.
It's a dexterity game about matching patterns and trying to grab a totem pole in the center of the table as fast as you can when you notice a matching pattern. I've loved it for a very long time. I used to be in the tournaments at DexCon for it every single year.
Yeah.
I never quite won a trophy, but I did almost break my pinky one year, so fond memories.
We used to have a saying at DexCon that if blood isn't drawn during a game of Jungle Speed,
it's
something's not right.
Yeah. Until you see blood.
That's right. And literally people would come out with bloody fingers.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
We have to institute a ruling after a couple of years of this tournament that if two people had grabbed the totem pole at what seemed like the same time, they they had to stop and have somebody like inspect their hands to see who was beneath the other hand, because
The lowest.
the
Right.
rule was whoever holds on to it last gets it, and people were dragged across tables. It was a nightmare, but like a fun, my kind of nightmare. So that's my favorite game. I love it so much.
It's a fantastic game, and again, that's one of those games from the early DexCons that I played all the time. I don't remember playing with you, Sydney. You would have been too tiny for me to be playing with, but you would have beaten me. I guarantee you would have beaten me. My favorite game is easy, and I talk about it all the time. It's War of the Ring, dripping with the Lord of the Rings theme, action dice selection, card-driven war game. I just can't get enough. It's a big game. But now in retirement, I get to play it 4 times a year, so it's wonderful.
Nice.
And I just love it. I have the collector's edition. It's my most important game in my collection. And as far as designers, I'll just throw out a few. Besides Sydney and Jeff Engelstein, of course, is my favorite designers. I'm a big Martin Wallace fan, even though some of his games are so heavy for me. But I'm just a big fan of his work, and I have almost every game he's published, and I've followed him throughout the years. Rob Davio and the stuff that he's done and they continue to do over Restoration. Vladish Fadl, Wolfgang Warsch. These are some of the guys that I consider just great designers who have and or continue to do amazing things in the design space in the industry.
Yeah, totally.
A great designer is also Nikki Valens. I love her work. She has sort of done a lot of like co-design projects. She did Quirky Circuits. She's a good friend of mine and very talented.
Nice.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you too much more. I know, Stephen, you've got a Pathfinder session to head to, right?
That's right, actually.
So thank you both, Sydney and Stephen, so much for chatting with us today. It was just so lovely to talk to you. I feel I could have talked to you for ages and ages. Hopefully you at home enjoyed this conversation. Stick around, because Brian and I are going to tell you how you can win yourself a copy of a Stronghold game. Maybe it's Terraforming Mars, or you know what? Maybe if you have Terraforming Mars, maybe it's Jungle Speed. Now, I think it should be Jungle Speed. Let's be real. We're calling an audible here. And if you already own Terraforming Mars, is Jungle Speed in print? Is it still in print?
Yes.
It is, but it's not a Stronghold.
Not a Stronghold game.
Stronghold game. Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll do 2. Who knows?
And unfortunately, it's in print with a wimpy plastic, like squeaky toy totem pole that if you get hit in the head, won't hurt you. It used to be made of solid wood.
Yeah, we want to have more danger in our game.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the secret Terraforming Mars that's coming up. Terraforming Mars Death Edition. Who knows? Anyway, Brian and I will talk to you about that. We'll let Sydney and Stephen go. Thank you so much for joining. And hey, if you want to hang out and play board games with Stephen Buonocore, he'll be at the World Series of Board Gaming happening September 24th to 28th in Las Vegas. Sydney, maybe if you're free, we can get you down there as well. We always like to get a bunch of people down. I know your schedule's not probably super busy, so I won't put you on the spot here. But
I'd love to come if I could. I would have to check because there are just so many conventions going on.
For sure. Oh, absolutely.
Nonstop.
Yeah. But we'll talk to you a little bit more. Thank you again, Stephen, Sydney, for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
And we're back. Regretfully, I could have talked to both of them for 2 to 3 more hours, but we got to cut it off sometime, unfortunately, and so we did have our cut off. But yeah, that was great. It's really cool hearing from the publisher's perspective, right, and seeing the other side of it.
Definitely, and it does give us a chance to change our code names.
That's true. Yeah, if you've been paying attention to this designer series, you know that Brian and I always start off with specific code names, and now we realize that our code name should be food related. So I guess I'm no longer Chris. I'm Chris Spaghetti George, and I'm Meatball Brian. Meatball Brian kills me. Honestly, it kills me. We were talking about this a little bit in between the hanging up with Stephen and Sydney, and now, and I'm just so happy. So thank you for sticking around, and also because you stick around. and you heard our awesome code names of Meatball Brian, oh, I'm never not calling you that. It's so good. Well, now we're going to tell you how to win a copy of Terraforming Mars or Jungle Fever or an expansion to Terraforming Mars if you don't have one. And hey, if you happen to win and you have all of them, well, I hear that Prelude 2 is coming out, so you still could be a winner. What you need to do is drop a comment down below and let us know what is your favorite Stronghold or Indie Board and Cards game. That is required. It's a requirement to win, and then I will personally draw one of those winners in 2 weeks' time. Stay tuned to the World Series of Board Gaming's news update channel. I will announce them personally on video format in order so that we avoid any YouTube scammers. It's just the way of the world. People will tell you that you've won and they'll try to impersonate you until you hear it from my mouth. You haven't won, so make sure that you stay tuned to those sort of updates, and I will announce the winner. You have 2 weeks from the day that this is posted to get your comments down below and say, what's your favorite Stronghold or Indie Board and Cards game, or which one of their titles do you want to try the most as well. I love the Gone Sean Clever series that Stronghold is also behind. I wanted to talk about that, but there was no time, Brian. Maybe in the sequel. Maybe we'll
have to drag Stephen out a little bit and maybe do something when we get to Vegas.
That's true. Yeah, maybe if you want to know more about Stronghold, well, all you have to do is come to the World Series of Board Gaming happening in Vegas the 24th to 28th. You can get your tickets now. We're working our level best to make the best event possible. Brian and I are going to be there. Tom Vassel's going to be there. Z Garcia is going to be there. Camilla Cleghorn's going to be there. It's going to be streamed on the Dice Tower Network. Stephen Buonocore is going to be there. A whole slew of people are going to be there to hang out. Shelfside's going to be there. A ton of people will be there to hang out with, play games with, when you're not busy winning one of those awesome Super Bowl style World Series of Board Gaming rings, proving that you're the best board gamer out there. It's going to be such a fun time, both in and out of the tournament. I can't wait. I highly recommend you check us out. If you want to check out the website, go to www.wsbgvegas.com, and all the information is there. But until next time, we'll see you next time with our series. Unless you have anything else to add, Brian.
I'm great.
Well,
as always,
I'm Chris
just
Spaghetti George.
Like a meatball. I'm great.
And we got Meatball Brian rolling like a meatball. We will see you all in Vegas, and as we say at WSBG, get in the game.